Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Always good to be here on Wednesday morning, even in the middle of winter.
Excellent, excellent. And what's your spiritual energy number today?
I'm a 10. I'm a 10. Didn't have to choose it this morning. It was just there, and I'm just reinforcing it. Just a lot of good work for me going on. If I could get paid really well for it, I'd be an 11 or a 12. But I'm doing some good work that I care about, and it's really easy for me to get up and have that level of energy. So I'm happy to be here, and this may raise me up even to a 12 being here with you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, same here. I concur. I'm a 10 as well. At the again, waking up with an attitude of grace, and just being able to enjoy that Super Bowl. And I'll talk a little more about that as we get into our show. But just grateful to be a 10, And just one quick point on that, too. I was at a meeting the other day, and I was telling a gentleman who we've done some building in the past, and we're working on some projects going forward. And in our meeting, I realized that I had never asked him the question of what his spiritual energy number was in any of our meetings. And so I said, okay, going forward, I'm going to do that. So I laid out the context of why I did it, and I shared it with him. And because we have an alignment, that's where I'm going with this, is that he immediately wasn't familiar with it, but enjoyed it right off the bat. So that's a good question. I love it, and that's something I'm going to incorporate. And that's when you got alignment with somebody, when it just hits something that resonates with you. Like, I like that. You don't look at it from an ego context or negative or, victim perspective. So I'm just grateful to continue to keep, building with people like this.
Yeah.
I'm a 10 with that space. So what's your gratitude moment? Mind sharing that, please?
Yeah, so I'm grateful for my standard gratitude, which I'm always going to recite here. Is I'm grateful for indoor plumbing. I'm grateful for electricity, and I have access to heat in the winter. And rarely do I use air conditioning because it hasn't been that hot lately. But I have temperature control in a house. And even last week, I referenced that we had some problems with our well, so I didn't have water for a day or two, and then it was really rusty water, and that has gradually resolved itself. And so I'm just grateful for little things like that, which most people I know we take for granted. So also sound mind, as far as I can tell. You'll let me know if it seems like I'm unsound in my mind. And my body, for the most part, some arthritis here or there, occasional hip replacement. But generally speaking, my body works pretty well as well. And so my basic needs are taken care of. And I'm the depth of gratitude I feel for that, especially, but not only, in contrast with a lot of the human beings I know, and many more human beings whom I don't know but know of, who are really suffering day to day. So I'm just grateful for the relative good health and basic needs being met that I enjoy.
Excellent. I feel you on that. And I would say my gratitude moment is, again, my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. The 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. Mother who's still alive. Even though my mom's getting to the point where I know it's at a stage where any day now, I can get a call. She's back in the hospital again. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for, watching my mom in particular, knowing how she was, a good person, a person of love, kindness. She was like the person of the community. Even when I was in St. Louis, she was. All my childhood friends would come by and she would fix food, and everybody knew my mom personally. She had a personal relationship with everybody because she was able to touch them like that. And then even moving here in the D.C. area and starting another life, another community, and new friends. and she still became that pillar as well. Just by being a person that serves and gives. And say all that to say that as I can see, it's getting to the point where she's ready to transition soon, and the suffering she's going through makes me want to. I'm accepting the fact that that's the best option for her. That it would be selfish at this point to continue to want her around. She still has sound mind. I'm grateful for that. Still converse with her, but just watching her suffer and constant hospitals, constant rely completely on other people for everything she needs now, and she doesn't deserve that. Looking back on her life, and so I'm grateful that it's getting near that part, and just wish that she'll find peace with it. So grateful for that, to be even experienced that and growing in that. Then think I would get to a point where I would feel that way. So it just gratitude that you have my mom alive while I'm 55. So she's able to live. She's lived to me through my entire life, obviously, and that's something to be grateful for.
Yep. Amen.
And as I was sharing earlier, when I was explaining to somebody that the guy that when I was a 10, why I was a 10, is he said he was a 7, and then most people usually give that answer without me giving the context, right? Just say 0 being life sucks and 10 being life is awesome. I notice how many people reluctantly, just with that bit of information, choose a 10. That's a rarity when somebody say, I'm a 10. Because I think most people look at it and they say that 10 is like perfect. And they don't want to be perfect. So not a 10. That's definitely not a 10. Not a 0 for sure. So then they'll find a 7 or a 6 to be at, depending on what circumstances, what they've had to deal with, what time of day it is. So he said 7. Then I shared with him, I'm a 10, and I got into the reason why. I'm saying all this to say I gave a different perspective, a different answer that I usually give. That's why I want to share. So I said the context. So thanks for that patience with that. And what I said was I'm a 10 because when I go through my gratitude moment, which is what I'm doing now, it's hard not to be a 10 when you finish. So you look at all the things you're grateful for. How can you say not be a 10 despite, you might not have the financial wealth that you want, or have the clients you want, or whatever it is that you feel you're lacking in your life that will make you happy. And you got those reasons to feel not a 10. But when you go through your list of gratitudes like I'm doing right now, I find it very difficult not to be a 10 and truly mean the things you're grateful for, because it really puts grace on your thoughts. That's how I look at it. And I'm grateful to have that growth and see that. So I wrap up my gratitude moment by saying,
yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Appreciate to be able to share that, So now with all that being said, let's get into our show. So what do you see as our topic for today's discussion?
Yeah, so we're in our third week of in the middle of almost 3 years, but in our third week of taking a dive into my 2020 book, Enough with the Talking Points, Doing More Good Than Harm in Conversation. In the previous 2 weeks, we spoke about cultural givens and how our earliest years impact our worldview and how our worldview impacts us in conversation. That's what we did in the last 2 episodes. And today we're going to take a look at enough with partiality, we're calling it. And more specifically, we're going to speak about recognizing and suspending our preconceptions, our judgments, and our assumptions. Right? So recognizing and suspending preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions in conversation, because those things can all get in the way. And something I shared with you before we began, I'll just do a real quick version of this to talk about, just to show kind of a humorous example of preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions. So I only watch football, professional football, towards the end of the season, playoffs and Super Bowl. And I'm not religious about it, but I enjoy watching the best players and the best teams do what they do. So I had bought tickets to a show like 4 months ago, not knowing what the date was for the Super Bowl on Super Bowl Sunday. And I went down to the show, And halfway through the show, and I was recording the game. Halfway through the show, and these are people I've been listening to, 4 people on stage, at least since the 90s, maybe until the late 80s. And one of them came out after a brief break and just said, "Go Birds." And she looked out at the audience and she said, "Most of you don't even know what I'm talking about." So she was assuming that people who would go to a concert like this wouldn't be interested in sports, especially the Super Bowl. And then she said, "Phillies up 17-0." So it was that point in the game. And a bunch of people said, "We don't care." And I stood up, and other people said, "I'm recording it. I want to watch it when I get home. So no more updates." So she, this is again a funny example, but she assumed, one, people didn't even know what "Go Birds" meant. Two, that nobody really cared what the score was. And three, that it was okay to share that information without asking first. So that's the kind of, she could have said, we have an update on the Super Bowl in the back. Do you want to hear it or not? And some people would have said, we don't care. Some people would have said no. Maybe some would have said yes, but she didn't ask. She just shared it. Well, I was momentarily perturbed because I didn't want to know, what the score was. So that's kind of a funny example of what can happen with assumptions and judgments and preconceptions. When it happens in conversation, especially in disagreements, whether it's personal, political, business related, whatever it is, the preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions do nothing but get in the way. And that's what we want to address today. So that's, in a nutshell, that's it. I'll pause there, see if you want to throw anything out there, and then we can jump in.
Well, again, thank you for choosing another wonderful topic, timely topic as well. It's interesting that you say, your example you gave with the woman, and people will say not reading the room. Nowadays when you make those assumptions and things of that nature and have your biases. I think it's so important because, and that's why I'm glad we had this conversation. It's just ironic that you wrote the book, because for me, I'm on that path as to become fully human. I believe that communication is also key. Being able to convey your thoughts and who you are, and being able to show growth in people who've known you for years, what you're talking about now and what you're talking about in the past. So, like, I think that woman felt it from a context of, let me share this again, thinking through ego. And I'm not judging her. I mean, that's how people's normal thought process is. I got something. I'm the first one that has this information. I was talking about. Let me share it. I'm saying, and I don't know the woman. I'm not sure that's her thought process or not. But I'm just saying that could possibly be her thought process. Until what you're saying is, not everybody wants to hear that. So you got to pause for a moment and think about what you're saying and what you're doing can have the impact it can have on others. And that's really being self-aware and really moving up that level of vibrating at a different frequency. It'd be interesting to have a conversation with her to ask her how she felt after being told that. Was she offended by it, disappointed? Was it like, oh, interesting, maybe I should read the room next time? So I'd love to hear what her thoughts were about the interaction with you, see was there any growth from it, and that to me sets a context just for everything I'm doing now. I realize that things happen for you in your life really based on the conversations that you have. I mean, it's a lot of other factors. I'm coming up with 5 factors. I like to put things in some kind of sequential, logical step. I know it doesn't mean everything, but for me, I look at, this is how I can remember, this is how I can relate, this is how I can grow. So I put things in that kind of a sequential context, 5 steps, 7 steps, mainly because the books I love to read, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, are their model. It used to be the 17 Lessons of the Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. So that just kind of framework has always been in my mind, thinking along those terms. Because when you say that, then the goal becomes immediately, how do I remember the 17? Yeah. How do I remember the 7? And how do I begin to apply those 7? And which one's first and why, so long story short. But being self-aware is where I look at that, the core of my conversation. And that's why I believe it's important to understand how to communicate with people so that you can get the best and the most out of a conversation. And going back to what I was saying earlier, as I begin to wrap up, that's why I believe that it's so critical now to get someone's and even share your spiritual energy number before you engage in conversation. Because a lot of being human means that you're going to be bringing a lot of things into that energy, thoughts. I call it baggage, sometimes if it's negative, into that conversation, whether it's 15 minutes, whether it's an hour. And so, as you say, your preconceived biases, your cultural givens are all going to play a role. Then you add that to something happening in your life that day or something longer happening in your life, usually around health or financial. Most people are always in one of those two things and or both. So you bring all that to that 15-minute hour conversation. And if a person can't prioritize and focus and understand how I want to be present, I want to be engaged, and I want to get the most out of this conversation and give the most out of this conversation for this other person across from me's investment of time as well. So I've often now start, and I used to do it, but now I'm getting back into the importance of it, asking or thanking someone for their investment of time and energy, because they could be anywhere, So if someone's there listening, to you, they're giving you their attention in this world we live in where everything is competing for attention. Your phone is sitting there ready to notify you and let you know, look at me, that every app is competing once you do that. Well, look at me from this, So all that's being said is being fully aware of who you are, self-awareness, and the journey to be fully human. So great topic.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just make one last remark about the score sharing at the concert. I mean, the woman who shared it is great. I mean, she's been around for years, singer songwriter. Is actually, for a variety of reasons, she lives in Manhattan. She is a Phillies fan, so she was excited. She's not originally from Philadelphia, from New York, and she probably read the room generally pretty well. Because had I known that February 9th was the Super Bowl when I bought these tickets last October or November, I'm not saying I wouldn't have got the tickets, but it would have been easier because the concert was an hour away. I had to drive for an hour and an hour back. And I might not have I've bought the tickets. A lot of the people in that room, and this is contemporary folk music. I mean, 4 people were really good songwriters and guitar players and piano players who've been doing it since the 80s. And the oldest one is my age, he's 70 years old. And the youngest one is probably just about 60. And they're great, and they and not particularly concerned with who wins a sporting event. So she probably read the room reasonably well, except for like I was an outlier, as were probably a handful of other people. But because I got the tickets right when they went on sale, I mean, I was in the front row, just right of center, and I stood up and said, "Stop." Which is the kind of thing you can do there because there's give and take with the audience, and it's kind of a fun setting. So I wasn't being rude or mean spirited or anything. I said, "No more updates, man." So anyway, not that I'm defending her, but so more to the point of what's going on, I'm going to share personally why this is important for me. So because I wrote a book and because you and I are doing this podcast today, doesn't mean that I don't have preconceptions, judgments, or make assumptions, because I definitely do, but I know that I do. And it's important to be able to say this next piece. I have preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions. They don't have me. If I'm not aware of them, they have me. It's shadow stuff if I'm not aware of it, right? And they have me, and that's much more of a problem in conversation. Just for an example, I hope I don't offend any listeners, but if I do, man up. No, just kidding. So I have certain, at this stage of my life, And for most of my adult life, I've had this set of preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions. When Donald Trump says anything, all right, I have an underlying preconception that he's lying. Not every single word. I mean, that would be, it's almost impossible to lie all the time, I think. But I've known who he is since the late 70s, early 80s. I grew up in Yonkers, went to school at St. John's in Queens. He was in the local tabloids and the evening news back then. I've spoken about this before. And he was this heir for his father's millions, and he was in the news, and he spoke with this arrogance, and he hadn't done anything except do what his father told him to do so he could keep the money and the business. And he hasn't learned a lot. He's probably learned a lot about tax law and real estate development because he does that stuff. But he hasn't really developed as a human being. So when he was nominated to become president, that was very frightening to me because I had a good sense of who he is. And he's never done anything for any reason other than his own self-aggrandizement or to build his brand. That's what he does well. And he has no problems lying about it. Prior to 2016, he was in court over 3,500 times as both a defendant and a plaintiff for business reasons. So he lives in litigation. And he never apologizes or never owns losing when he loses. So I knew all of that. So as president of the United States now, the damage he's doing, that's definitely post-constitutional. I have to really check in with myself every time he says something and to really listen to what he says in case there's some element of truth or goodness in it. Because I don't expect there to be. Those are my assumptions, my preconceptions, but they're based in evidence. It's not just some, innate bias I have. It's based in things I can point to that are real. But they're still assumptions, preconceptions, and judgments. So I want to just, give that example because what's going on in our country now, which in terms of what I understand and what I see, is a real threat to democracy. It's a combination of an attempt to gain power for the Christian right and for a group of oligarchs, billionaires, who want more say in. They already had a lot of say in Congress, millionaires and billionaires from the steel industry forward, pharmaceutical industry, the gun industry. I mean, Congress has always been influenced by corporate money. This is a game changer now with a handful of oligarchs, billionaires who control much of the communication that people use. Google, Meta with Facebook and Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, and others. So there's a real danger here. And the way oligarchy works, and the way Putin in Russia is a great example. When he got power, he basically said to the oligarchs, and he had a meeting, and he himself is an oligarch. He is also a kleptocrat. He's stolen money from the people of Russia. I mean, at one point he may have been the richest person in the world, but social media guys kind of took over that. But in Russia, and this is post-Soviet Union now, it's about Russia, not the Soviet Union. He basically said to the other billionaires, you can keep your money, you can continue to do what you do, as long as you don't criticize me or the government. If you start to speak out against the government, all right, you're going to be banished or you're going to be put in jail. A handful of them spoke out and were banished and put in jail. The majority of them kept their mouths shut and kept their billions, kept their yachts, etc. That's not a scare tactic right now, because Elon Musk is in the middle of the federal government right now, providing no evidence and saying he's getting rid of fraud and corruption. He has not provided a single bit of evidence of fraud or corruption. What he's done is impacting the agencies with which he has legal problems, and which impact his work in China, other parts of Asia, Europe, and throughout the world. So there's a real danger here, and there are preconceptions for people who support Trump and Musk, and they believe that USAID, US aid, is this corrupt government agency that's Marxist, that's the language they're using, that's leftist, that's socialist, that doesn't really represent the American people. And if you understand what USAID does, and the idea for it began with Eisenhower post World War II. He didn't implement USAID, it came later, but he felt that rather than using the military to spread democracy, which they did anyway in Vietnam, tried to and failed, that using soft power, helping other countries develop with money and education, food, rebuilding after they had been devastated by some tragedy or war or natural disaster, would help to build trust and an alliance with the United States. And that's what they've been doing for some decades now. And it became increasingly important to do that. The programs under USAID, the Agency for International Development, because China and Russia do the same thing. China is in South America, they're in the Middle East, they're in Africa, and they are doing everything they can to invest in these nations and to influence them politically, financially, and, well, economically and financially. And so it's all the countries are doing it. And USAID was the non-military way to help people and build alliances for the United States. So it's an important part of America's work in the world if you care about democratic process winning out over dictators, autocrats, and oligarchies. But a lot of Americans only hear what Musk and Trump say about it, USAID, and other agencies as well, on Fox News and Newsmax and America One or whatever that other conservative station is, and they're believing things that are literally not true. They are absolutely false. So assumptions, judgments, and preconceptions based in superficial lies is a major danger to democracy. And George Orwell wrote about it in fiction in both Animal Farm and 1984. So anyway, that was kind of a little bit of a diatribe. I understand that, but that's a really clear example of the dangers of preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions, especially when they have us, and we're not aware that they are assumptions and preconceptions. So I'll let you talk now.
As you were talking about that, I was listening. And when I saw the topic as well, a lot of things went through my mind as far as examples of that, today's conversations, or how do I interpret that? How do I look at it? And again, always couching everything now because of you, obviously, and my cultural givens perspective compared to where I am now, saying, and my identity as well. And so I'm aware, and I'm always evaluating my thoughts, my initial reactions. Where is it coming from? My identity that I see myself now, my cultural givens, sure all that's playing a role, but how much so, as far as my initial reaction. And once I think through it, I can always let my identity win out over my cultural givens for sure. If I give myself that pause. But now, with that being said, a couple of things I want to respond to. Number one, I start by my response to what Eli and Trump, are doing. Again, I'm an engineer, so I'm always in at the crux of it and the pattern. And when you look at things from a how does it work in a systems perspective, you don't focus so much on the biases. You just look at the mechanics of it. It is what it is. And so, with that being said, I look at what Trump has done is he's holding a mirror up to America for its hypocrisy. America wants to create the image of being a caring, loving, kinder nation, but it really never has been, as you lay out in your book, the history of how this country came about, those things, and just now big government, like everything Trump really points out, they're true issues. He magnifies them, definitely magnifies them, the lens on it for his benefit. So he's not really trying to change anything, but he shines a light on it and use that as a way of rallying people around him. And because people can see that like, there's definitely a lot of mismanagement, a lot of waste in the government. That's a fact. You know, you can't escape that. You can see it. I mean, I personally know people who work for the federal government that haven't been back to the office since COVID. You know, I'm not calling them out as individuals. I'm just saying most people know that you get a government job, it's a cushy government job. You don't get fired. You don't have to work as hard. You know, that's the image. That's the brand behind working for the federal government. Whether it's, and I worked in the federal government before when I was earlier on, but what Trump and them are doing is again serving their own agenda. So they put that lens that a lot of people know and agree and say, okay, well, we're going to tackle things just to show that we really want to rob, we want to put more of that waste in our pockets that people have going out there. So instead of like this reporter yesterday asked Elon Musk, well, you know, you said that the $50 million was going over to Hamas and condoms for Hamas. So that was a waste. And now it comes out it was not going to Hamas, it was going to the Palestinian people to prevent the spread of a sexually transmitted disease. So would you be willing to correct that? Now that you've now that truth has come out, and Elon said, well, yeah, I'm going to be wrong sometimes. Sometimes I'm going to get it wrong, and so now that that's come out, I will say this: that's still $50 million for condoms is still too much, and I have to agree with him. Her point was you put it on Hamas because that's where the anger is, and you throw everything at the boogeyman. But at the end of the day, $50 million for condoms is still excessive. It's still too much. It doesn't take away the fact that that's waste on a large scale. Using the USAID, that's not even 10% of the budget, but they use that as a boogeyman. Because again,
1%.
Less than 1% of it. So what it does is that gets the most conversations around it. So now most people are going to be focused on that. Our attention is there while they do some on a massive scale over here. And that's what they're doing. They're constantly manipulating and throwing out little discussion bites for us that they know that's anything about race or uh, that has a political edge to it or that's going to have an economic edge to it. People are going to focus on that. That's going to dominate news cycles. They're not going to understand what's really going on the higher end, on the higher level, what they got going on behind the scenes. And so I just want to put that in context. That's my thought. That's what Trump them is doing. Trump is showing I've been using loopholes because of my privilege, because of my wealth, my entire life. And now I'm going to take those loopholes to the next level and show folks that you can't have ultimate power. You can't have absolute power. And I'm gonna live my life that way. Like I think the only reason he's even president right now is to avoid going to jail. If he can, the ego, he wants some of the power, but I don't believe he really wants to be president. That's why he got Elon doing all the real work. He's seeing somebody that okay, I can just put him out there, and because he's wealthy, I respect him. Like I watched an interview with Elon and Trump in the Oval Office. I've never seen Trump ever let someone else dominate the conversation the way he was. Like he just said, okay, I'm just going to give my little part and I'm shut up and let Elon do the talking. Elon just rambled. He didn't come with any kind of clear action points that he was hitting on that Trump didn't want to interrupt. It was just him rambling his thoughts of what he's, again, stalling for the cameras, showing off, getting the attention. But Trump gave him the spotlight. So that showed me right there where Trump's intention is. I'm too old to really try to govern. I'm gonna use my platform, get riches, get stay out of jail, and get the respect of the world because I am that leader. But I'm not going to really be leading. I'm going to let other people lead. Project 20, and I think people around them, that's why they created Project 2025. They realize Trump is not going to govern. Democrats always keep saying he's dumb and all things like that. But what they realize, well, how can we best use Trump while he's in office? How can we best leverage him? The fact that he's willing to say the things that nobody else is willing to say. He doesn't care about getting canceled. That's not even Trump's fear that something he's going to say is going to get canceled. So once he showed the world that, and the far right, Christian right, who had that as their agenda, he becomes okay. He's the perfect person who's the face of this movement, and we can do everything we want to push through him. We just got to give him the blueprint, and if we allow him to have what he feels to be the power, then we get everything we want as far as our agenda is concerned. So that's what I see really happening. A couple other things I just want to add before I wrap up is so to the point of assumptions, you know, judgments, preconceived ideas, it's woven into now our entire culture. Even people who think that they're doing good are actually doing harm based on their cultural givens and don't even realize it. I'll give you an example of what I mean. There's so many now folks online who has their platforms who are, I would say, those Republicans who've been converted over to Democrat because Trump is so bad. So they can't deal with Trump. So they come over to the Democratic side. And they're the ones who now have the loudest platforms because now they can not agree with or support any of the true Democratic policies. So they can put their stain and their biases on what needs to be cut because they never believed in that anyway. They just non-Trumpers, but now they align themselves with Democrats. So my point, I'm saying, one man in particular, I'm not going to say his name today, just for the point of deciding whether or not I want to bring out certain people's name and give them that kind of light. But it's just one gentleman in particular who, again, is one of the Republican converts over the Democrat, and he topic of his podcast came across my YouTube feed. And it was just a clip, 15-minute, 10-minute clip. And he said, all the hate from the right, racist hate, something along those lines from the right about Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl halftime performance. So because he used that clickbait in the title, my culture giving kicked in and said, okay, let me hear what they want to say. Because I know what I saw, and I know what my circle is going to be saying. So let me hear what some of the far right mega, as he said, mega. That's how they group them together now. The megas think. So now, of course, I know what they're going to say. I don't expect anything positive. Like I don't expect any of them to say it's the greatest Super Bowl performance I've ever seen. But he began to show folks like the woman who's the forget her name right now, but she is the one that killed the puppies. Chrissy Nome, I believe, is her
Yeah,
name.
Kirsty Nome. Yeah,
Chrissy Nome. And he showed a tweet by her saying she didn't understand what he said. He showed Ben Shapiro. So the people he's showing, I kind of already know before they even what they said, what their thoughts were. But surprisingly, it wasn't really race based. It was she said I didn't understand. It was I'm the only one who didn't understand what he said, and then Ben Shapiro basically said the same thing, similar. And so I'm thinking like, well, see, that's kind of clickbait. That's not really racial. Because to be honest, I didn't really understand everything Kendrick Lamar said either. So I kind of agree with him. But I get the symbolism and a lot of other things around it, which made me like it. That's my culture. But listening live, I know if I wasn't a person from the hip hop culture, I'd have been thinking the same thing. What is he saying? What is he doing there? Where's the entertainment? But yeah, it's definitely a lot of symbolism with that. And I'm not saying that's not the case. So my point is, so for the guy before he got into the conservative perspective, he shared his. He was like, yeah, so I would say I give it probably a B, and it definitely wasn't one of the best, halftime shows I've seen. And since they kind of go in the hip hop way, a lot of those have been like C's, and so he shared his own biases and judgments that was to me worse than examples he showed. Now again, he showed some folks who were just outright racist that came out and said one person was ignorant enough to say that's DEI. Where was the lack of DEI? Was he? I thought this was the world of DEI. As a comedy made it like there was no white performers with him. So where's the diversity there? So I'm saying all that to say is that with this conversation we're having is so important. You talked about the highest level of oligarchy, and you're absolutely right. But at the same time, even on a small level, people don't even realize how much damage they do, and thinking that they're saying we're on the same team now. He will think that he's more in the line of being a woke, but without calling himself woke. But he think he would have more alignment there with someone, but he's not. He's just someone who doesn't like Trump, but still holds true to all the biases of everybody else that's usually associated with conservatism. And that's a part for me that I wish needs to be talked about more, because now if you watch in the media, and I get the media is controlled by the billionaires, all of them are counting down to Trump, but even the pundits who think they're doing good things that's on MSNBC and CNN don't realize how much of their cultural bias, cultural givens, their bias, their judgments are keeping people confused, too much information, and you really have to be a critical thinker nowadays to really act. Because if you letting that as if you tune in so much to here's all things that's going wrong in the world. Here's what Elon Musk and Trump is doing. Here's how you're powerless. Here's all the racist and hatred that's being espoused online. Here's all the, just so much negative news that's feeding you every day on every platform and every mode of communication that we have. You got to really be able to navigate that and have critical thinking, I think, in order to really get anything productive done out of your day.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I want to go back to part of the earliest thing that you referenced with Musk and Trump and what they're doing. One of my favorite, albeit disturbing, quotes came from retired Supreme Court Justice David Souter in a conversation he had at the University of New Hampshire Law School back in 2012. And in fact, if anybody listens to Substack, reads or listens to Substack, my Substack newsletter, which came out this morning, quotes it at length. I'll just get to the heart of it, though. He said the thing that keeps him up, that worries him most at night, is not an external invasion from another country or a lot of other things, but he says it's the level of civic ignorance of the citizens of the United States. He said that democracy can't survive too much ignorance. And he goes on from there. It's a striking quote, the clarity with which he says it. And so I want to just jump off of that point to some basic middle school civics. And I'm not a historian. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm just a guy who reads a lot, pays attention, and tries to get things right. So I'm going to just start off with the example of the USAID. But I'm going to just mention some other things. So USAID is one organization that's being affected. The FBI, another organization is being affected by Trump and Musk. CIA, Department of Education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are numerous of them now that are being infiltrated, and they're firing people and stopping payments, et cetera. All of those organizations that I just mentioned have been supported by Republicans and Democrats in Congress for decades. No exceptions. Department of Education is probably the closest one because Republicans wanted to put education just back in the states and have no federal influence. That one is a little bit on the cusp, on the line. And there are ways, constitutionally structured ways, that if the people of the United States, through their congressional electors, their congressional representatives, want something changed, Congress, which controls the Treasury, which controls the purse strings, that only Congress can spend the money or stop the money. If there were major problems with the USAID or the FBI or the CIA, Department of Education, it could be brought up. The constitutional way to do it, it gets brought up by a vote, either in the House or the Senate. There's a resolution. It's voted on. It goes to both houses. If they agree on it, it goes to the president. The president can agree with it or veto it. And then the Congress can overcome the veto with like a 2/3 majority. So there are constitutional ways to do what Trump and Musk are doing unilaterally from the executive office, which is a violation, or at the very least, a bastardization of the checks and balances that the founders put into the Constitution so that there would be an executive branch to enforce the law, a legislative branch, right, to make the law, and a judicial branch to interpret the law when necessary. And what has happened now, because the MAGA Republicans control the White House, the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court, that there are really no checks and balances. But here's the point I want to make. Had Trump and Musk and the people and Russ Vought from Project 2025, had they really wanted to disassemble the democratic structures of our Constitution or our government, they could have tried to do it according to the structures of the government. They could have involved Congress. There was a way to do it. So people like me who would disagree with dismantling USAID or the FBI would have to say, oh, shit. Congress voted on it, Supreme Court, the president okayed it, Supreme Court upheld it. That's not what's happening. What's happening now is a constitutional crisis, which many Americans who suffer from invincible ignorance are unaware of because they don't know, as retired Justice David Souter said, they don't know how the government works. They don't know who's responsible for what. And so their judgments and assumptions about what Donald Trump says or Elon Musk says are based in ignorance. There's no other way to say that. So had these changes, again, I'm going to repeat this, been made or had been attempted to be made through the structures that Republicans and Democrats have agreed on for 2.5 centuries almost, those who were against these changes could protest, but the government was working. Every Democrat and every Republican I know agrees with what you said about the government being bloated and inefficient in certain areas. But what I pointed to in Healing America's Narratives wasn't that America's a bad country. I was really clear on that. It was at the shadow of America. Those 9 traits of ignorance, arrogance, greed, bigotry, violence, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness have been alive and well since the founders. And they subjugated women and African Americans and indigenous peoples, and then tried to subjugate the Vietnamese and continue to subjugate people. I mean, what Trump and Musk are doing is continuing their own version of subjugation. They're trying to actually subjugate the U.S. Constitution. So I think America, there's a reason that people still, used to up until 2016, still want to come to this country with all of its flaws, and it has lots of them. And I itemize them in Healing America's Narratives. But people still wanted to come here because you were free. It wasn't an equal playing field. It wasn't completely level, but there was a playing field you could get onto and you could succeed. Major flaws in it. History has shown that. Real history has shown that. But what Musk and Trump and those who are allied with them are afraid of them in Congress. What they're doing now is beyond subjugating women, the poor, Africans and then African Americans, indigenous peoples, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They are literally subjugating the Constitution of the United States, and we have a constitutional democratic crisis. And the ignorance of many people in America is allowing that to happen. Now, there are a lot of people, God bless the federal attorneys who are going to court. These things are going in front of courts all over the country. But many of the courts are supported by, or many of the judges are Trump appointed or Christian Right appointed since the 1980s. They've been taking over the court since the 1980s. So it's a real crisis. And the preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions that are grounded in things that are not true, if you do the work of finding out, are a danger to the future of this country from where I sit. And I've pointed out the flaws of the United States in some detail. I believe it's salvageable, but a lot of people are going to have to do a lot of work and a lot of listening and a lot of learning if we're going to stop the takeover of the United States federal government by billionaires, Trump, Musk, and others. Because there's a real danger of that happening, and democracies don't last forever. There's no reason, there's no proof that democracies or socialist nations or communist nations are inevitable and get to go on forever. None of them are guaranteed. And Americans have gotten sloppy with protecting their democracy, I think.
Yeah. Well, let me definitely make sure I make my last statement clear on that. I wasn't saying in your book that you were saying America was a bad country.
Oh, and I know that. I was clear on what you meant. So
I'm just saying I wanted to make sure that for our listening audience that wasn't my intent behind that statement. But what I'm saying is my cultural givens, now with that being in context, is that, see, there is no difference from my perspective of where America is now and where America was then. Like the Constitution and the three branches of government you laid out hasn't been working for, in my opinion, and historical facts there as well, for myself of identifying with my race. It hasn't been there. I haven't seen the judicial work, haven't seen congressional Congress work, haven't seen the executive branch work in our best interests. So what we're seeing now is like, well, that's just how America's always worked from that perspective. And looking at, and I get what you're saying, but I'm asking myself, even if Trump had and Elon had gone through the process, and I'm saying they should have. I agree with you 100%. They should be doing it with executive orders. What Elon Musk is doing is incredibly illegal according to the laws as well as the Constitution. I agree with that 100%. But I also think that had they taken it through Congress, it would still be the same result. And it'd be worse because then it'd be law. At that point, at least it's not law. So we know it's illegal. So I'm glad they're doing it the way they are, to be honest, so that could be fought. But had they actually gone through the process, then it would be legal for them to do exactly what they're doing. So for me, it's like the hearing of Trump's cabinets. I mean, that was just a farce. It was like even J.D. Vance said himself, we shouldn't even be going through this process because the president says these are the people that should be put in office because he said that, so they should be put in office. That's what they believe. So we going through the hearings. We went through that whole process of congressional hearings and all that. And everyone knows they're not qualified, but they still all got, besides one, Matt Gaetz was the only one I believe that was actually denied. So going through that, and now they have the power. They've gone through the process, so we can't say that was a coup. They actually went through the process and was congressionally approved, knowing that they're incompetent, knowing they're going to carry out Trump's mission. So that's the part for me that is hard to accept, the importance of going through the democratic process. Like I said, just from my perspective, I'm glad we didn't, because then those things would be law. And then trying to change them after the fact, if we're able to ever get control and get a sane government back in order that really represents the people, whether it's Democratic Party or some new party, getting them to change those laws back now, I don't know the difficulty of that, what that would look like. Now they can at least lock Trump them up down the road or do something because they violated the law. It just gets to the point of what's the tipping point before we kick those laws in action and say, okay, this is too much. And I think Trump, as they like to say, in my neighborhood, is a term for somebody who constantly stepped over the line. They call him a habitual line stepper. Like he or she knew what the line was, and they would constantly step over that to disrespect you because it was always their agenda. At what point is there going to be a tipping point in this country for Trump to do it? I'm still to this day can see a lot of people in the mega world that still champion what Elon is doing. They're saying that he has the right to do that. And Trump elected him. And they have no issue at all with what he's doing. The congressional leaders, leader of the House, Speaker of the House, he has no issue with what Elon is doing. So had any bills come before him, I believe they would have passed. Democrats are not in a position to, I know it's a small majority in the House, it's greater in the Senate, but they have no control of any of the branches. And like you said, even the judicial branch, they don't have any control over that. So the Supreme Court is going to uphold anything. So at this point, I believe the best way forward, my perspective, is we got to really hold that mirror up and say, because I think this is where a lot of I can't speak for the other minorities. I can only speak for myself. What we do going forth is going to say everything about whether America really wants to be all the things it espouses to be, or is going to say, letting the shadow, as you talk about in your book, be the dominant culture, face of it, behavior. How that's what we got to determine going forward. And I'll rest on that point. So I know we're getting to the top of the hour.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Maybe we can pick this up next week. There's a lot more, because it's, for me, it's a scary moment in history. There have been lots of other scary moments, but none of them have been particularly constitutional in my lifetime. There hasn't been a constitutional crisis, except not even the same thing with Nixon. But that wasn't really a constitutional crisis because the system worked. And rather than being impeached and convicted, he resigned. But Nixon could be shamed. Trump, it seems, if you look at his history as a public adult, you can't shame him. He doesn't care. If he lies as a matter of course. So anyway, we do need to begin to bring this to a close. So I'll stop.
Yeah, we'll definitely pick it back up. So now, with all that being said, so we end on a positive note. That's our goal, is not to just be another one of those shows that just out here to tell you all the things that's wrong with the country, but also discuss the things that's going wrong, but discuss how there's a path forward. So give us some insight and some guidance on how we can move forward.
Yeah, so I'm just going to take the three primary words from today's topic: preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions. And when any one of us espouses a stance or a point of view, before saying it out loud, self-reflect. And then, everything, almost all of the advice I give each week is about critical thought and self-reflection. But that's, that's simply true. What are my preconceptions before I speak? What judgments am I making, and what assumptions might have me? To ask myself those questions, to get really clear on that, because I don't want to be wrong in public. I want to do good in conversation. I don't want to do harm in conversation. So let me just get clear on what preconceptions, judgments, and assumptions might be getting in my way. So that's the simple advice I would give. It's simple because it's straightforward. It's not simple to do, because it requires some effort. And it can lead to some discomfort if you find out that what you've been espousing or believing, in fact, is not based in fact. Who are you really then if you've been espousing things that are not in fact true? And that's a scary position to find yourself in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for those suggestions that we can look at implementing. And now we move into the last section of our show, which is to talk about and bring flowers, lift someone up, give them their credit, whether they're past or they're present, of someone who we believe is a fully human and lived a fully human lifestyle or living a fully human lifestyle, behavior characteristics. So when we're talking, it's not just some idealistic, but people who actually are examples. And I'll go first, and I'll say my example is Dolly Parton. You know, and I know growing up, Dolly Parton has always been someone, just knowing her from just the surface of only seeing her on TV shows or hearing some of her country songs. Um, that limited exposure, she's always seemed to be a good person, always seemed to be smiling, always. I've never heard anything negative about her. But in doing some research for what I believe to be people who are fully human, her name came up in the search. And I began to do a little more digging and realize, how she grew up in rural poverty and had a strong work ethic. She's been a creator of jobs and supporter of different nonprofit organizations, providing free books, fighting global illiteracy, you know, donate money to medical research. Just a good person using their platform well, never done anything to discredit herself or women in general, just been a great woman model and fully human as well. And just somebody who I want to lift up. And I don't think the media, again, with my purpose of suggesting the people I suggest, is that they don't get the flowers through the regular media of being fully human. Because the system, I don't believe, wants people to be on their mindset and that thought pattern. But Dolly Parton is somebody who is an example of a fully human being in this week's episode.
Yeah, great. She returned to or for the first time attended the Newport Folk Festival 2 or 3 years ago at the invitation of Brandi Carlile, and they performed on stage together. It was really moving moments, the two of them together. So yeah, thank you for that one. So I'm going to mention someone, I think I've mentioned him before, but he's kind of front and center for me this week is Chris Murphy, who's one of my senators here in Connecticut. I first voted for him when he moved out of the state legislature and ran for the U.S. House of Representatives in 2004. He ran basically opposing George W. Bush's attack on Iraq. The congressperson who he ran against was in support of that preemptive war in Iraq, and Murphy was against it. So I voted for him then, and I voted for him every year that he's run since, and he's been senator now for some years. But he's been one of the most outspoken and most visible senators since in the recent year or so, but especially in the last 2 or 3 weeks since the inauguration. And he had a town hall meeting in a school auditorium in West Hartford, Connecticut, last Saturday. But I'll cut to the chase. The thing that I like most about him, first of all, he's informed and he's articulate. So he knows what he's talking about, whether you agree with him or not. And he can articulate complex things in simple ways so everybody can kind of understand it. That's one. The second thing is when he's asked a question that one doesn't really know the answer to, or two, has not seen any evidence of, he says that. So there was one question somebody asked him at the town hall meeting and said, I'm in the military, blah, 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 and this is happening. Have you seen any evidence of the Trump administration doing this? And he basically didn't take the party line and say, yeah, that's a problem. He said, the way things are going with other agencies, with the FBI and everything, it wouldn't surprise me if that eventually happens, because that's what's happening. But there's no evidence of that as of right now. So that kind of answer where he gives his opinion at the beginning, but then he says, but he doesn't make up shit. So he really has integrity. He doesn't take corporate money, constantly asking me for money, which pisses me off. but he's not at the beck and call of anyone except his constituents. He doesn't take money from corporations. So I have a lot of respect. That's what we need in our federal government: Republicans, Democrats, Independents, people who are not paying back favors to large donors. So Chris Murphy.
All right, excellent. Well, again, as we wrap up our show, I want to thank you again, Reggie, for choosing a topic, being present, being a 10, and writing a book, Healing America's Narratives. Learned so much from it. Even the book you wrote now, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the title. Enough of discussion points, right?
Talking points, yeah.
Enough of the talking points, yeah. So great book there as well. And I want to thank our listening audience for listening to today, whether it's live or you listen to the replay. We appreciate you. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., let's all continue to work toward the path of being more fully human. Thank you.